officially ready to start. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the PoE2 podcast Tavern Talk with myself and co-host GHAZZY TV, interviewing Jonathan today, and the kitty cat, I guess, is the special guest number 2, talking about the witch class. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
Oh, I'm pretty good actually. I was really happy with how the event went, and honestly, I'm also happy with the fact that the changes that we've made post the event have also worked out really well. So I'm kind of riding on a high here of some good, some good changes and some good things are going on.
Oh, that's perfect. That actually rose into one of the questions we were going to ask, which I guess I'll just transition right into that one, which is in the first event we had, potion acquisition seemed to be changed by the second event. We were talking about that earlier when we had our chat in LA. And so I was going to ask you as a follow-up, now that you've had some time to sort of look at the feedback, what was the major change that you saw, or some of the major changes you think you're going to be doing from the last playtest we had? Anything major really pop out to you?
So the one that popped up the most, which was actually surprising to me, is a lot of people were really requesting the ability to change from controller to mouse and keyboard on the fly, like while they're in game, which is something that I was kind of always like, yeah, it'd be nice to have. But then having talked to so many people at the event, there were tons of people requesting it. And I realized the reason it's obvious in retrospect now, but people want to be able to control their character with a controller and then switch to mouse keyboard to do inventory management and stuff. And so because of that, I'm just keen to commit to that feature and just get it sorted. So it'll take a little bit of time, but we can. I'm very keen to get that done because I think it's something a lot of people are very keen for.
There you go.
Absolutely. Like another thing I saw that was changed from the playtest we did was the Spirit Reserve menu was a bit different. So you had these arrow keys.
We actually are redoing the Spirit Reservation UI a little bit. We actually had a new version we even designed before the event, but we didn't have time to get it into the event, so we've actually got another one coming that's like a bit nicer than the one that's in the video that you just saw. We didn't have time to put it in there. The one in the event that you played was of course on controller, so that was like different again. There's we could definitely do better there, so we're improving that. Effectively, what we're doing is we're making like a sort of special dedicated menu for Spirit Reservations and minions. So that you can change that more easily without having to go into the whole skill screen. That should mean that it's a little bit easier. What we sort of found doing testing of the one that we have now is that it's very easy to miss. And I think the reason why it was okay in the demo that you guys played is that because I was on stage showing you guys how minions work beforehand, it was sort of all right. But I think that the current one that's in game could still be better and tutorialized better. So we'll be improving that for sure.
Fair enough.
I was actually impressed with how well the game actually worked on controller. I know inventory management and ARPGs can always be a little bit difficult, but I was actually fairly surprised how smooth everything fairly was on the controller. Though there was thing that we noticed, we were talking about before the podcast, that trying to figure out how were we dumb? Because I just want to personally know, we couldn't figure out how to get the weapon skill points on the passive skill tree that works.
Yes, that is not obvious. And the way you actually do it on controller is that you hold the button down and then it puts up a radial menu. But that absolutely is the worst usable thing in the at the moment in the in controller. That like everyone has to be told that, which is obviously a really bad sign. We need to do something about that. Honestly, it's one of the hardest features to tutorialize because it's quite conceptually complicated even in the first place. We're going to be working on that. The weapon skill points right now, they kind of haven't been so everyone who knows how to use them uses them and they're really good, but we haven't made an effort yet to really teach people about them, and so we'll probably be tackling that before the next time we do an event like that.
Fair enough. I'm going to jump into a minion question. I try to keep a little bit of a leash on me when it comes to minion related questions.
Sure. You go, guys. Yeah, I know you're hype. Yeah, go for it.
Otherwise, I'll just occupy this for the next 2 weeks. It was actually about the amount of links. I'm going to read the question out. It says, will we be limited on the amount of links we can have in total active, or will we end up throwing literally anything on our utility skills in the end, as we're going to run out of support skill options? This is, of course, in mind that we can only have one unique support per player, I guess.
Right. So I'll talk a little bit about that decision because I think it's kind of interesting. So as GHAZZY was just saying, in PoE2, you can only have one of each support on your entire character. And it's kind of interesting how that came about. And it was actually, the change here was actually a direct result of the previous playtest as well. So basically, because you have, all these skills, they're all 6 links. We didn't want to have it be the case that for every skill you just use exactly the same set of supports. So the way we were trying to solve that before was effectively we had to make sure that in the design of each support, they all were designed such that you wouldn't want to do that. So yes, to give an example of that, if you just had a support, for example, like melee physical damage that just increases your physical damage of a melee skill, then you would have just put that on every single skill. Melee, if you're playing a melee character, you're going to put that on every single skill, because why wouldn't you? If it's the most efficient damage boost that you could get, you just do that. And we kind of thought that that would be really boring to have just every skill supported by the same stuff. So the initial solution that we had was, design the skills so that that's not going to happen. And what that kind of meant was we kind of had to think like, okay, we need to design this thing so that you kind of only really want it on one skill of your character. And that made it really, really hard to design support gems. Like, we were really struggling with that. And what you kind of ended up with is the situation we had in the last playtest, where the support gems all felt kind of weird and not like it's like not obvious how to use them, and like they didn't feel powerful, and like we ended up kind of like not dropping them really quickly either because they was kind of too complicated, and like it was just overall kind of a bit of a disaster. And so I'm not sure who had this idea, but at some point we were just like, hang on, if our goal is to have it so that you don't use the same support gem everywhere on your character, we could just literally limit you to one of each support gem per character. And as soon as we thought about that, we were like, okay, suddenly not only does like every support from PoE 1 immediately become like relevant and possible to do again in PoE 2, and just immediately unlocking like a huge amount of supports we can put in, but also it just unlocks like a huge amount of other designs that we could immediately do. So that decision kind of like immediately made supports just back to a reasonably good place again. And honestly, we came to that one surprisingly not that long ago, but it just really, really helped. So going back to then to your question about like, do you think that it's just going to turn into like, oh, just kind of throw whatever on there? The reason I don't think that is because we're being very purposeful with our design now to make sure. So we've got our support recommendations now for different skills, and we're kind of trying to make sure that for each skill that you can have, that there are at least 9 really good choices for that skill. And the way we're going about that is kind of like making sure that at each so there's a few different tiers of supports with the uncut support gem. We're sort of making sure that at each level, and this is actually a bit of a digression again, but I don't know if you guys have heard of like in Magic the Gathering, they have these psychographic profiles where like they categorize players into 3 types. You've got Timmy, Johnny, and Spike. And the idea here is that a Spike player is one who only cares about damage. Like they don't care about like things being cool or anything. It's just damage. They just want to do the most efficient thing possible. And a Johnny player cares about comboing things. Like they're interested in interesting combinations between abilities and so on. And a Timmy player just cares about something big and flashy that has some cool effect. So what we're trying to do is make it so that at each level of the support gems, there's 3 choices where one of them fits into one of those 3 psychographic profiles. And then that will mean that as you kind of go up with those uncut support gems, you're always going to feel like you've got something interesting for you, but also that there's enough choices. And the idea with that is that so long as we don't have, if we don't have like at least 9 cool choices for a gem, then we have to add more support gems. And so what I'm roundaboutly saying is that eventually there's going to be enough support gems that I think that you shouldn't have trouble finding interesting interactions for each of the for each of your skills. And we're not too afraid of having support gems that only work for 1 or 2 skills if that's required to actually make enough interesting things. So we'll obviously try and make it so they're applicable to as much as possible. But if we need to have something that just works on 2 skills, then that's fine, and we'll just live with it. So that was obviously ultimately a really, really long-winded answer to that question, but hopefully it provided a bit of a context for what's going on with support gems in PoE 2.
There was one thing missing though, and that is are we limited in the quantity of sockets, or are we expecting to have every single ability being able to become a 6-link?
Yeah. So every ability will definitely be a 6-link. Although
Awesome.
I will say that there has been some discussion about whether or not we should allow spirit reservations, not minions, but like just auras and stuff, to have to be 6-links. And the reason why is because it is really damn hard to design so many different supports for aura skills. So there has been some discussion about that, but I mean, we'll try, right? If we can make it happen, we'll make it happen. But yeah, that is definitely a hard task.
I can just go on with another one right off the bat,
Sure, go for it.
and that is a very important question for the community, and it's about the Animate Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first question is yes or no, will it exist in PoE 2? If yes, then are we seeing some differences in way this works compared to PoE 1?
So I'll tell you that Animate Guardian isn't in PoE 2 right now. It's a skill that I personally have a very soft spot for, and like we're doing things certainly like this along the lines, but we haven't. There's some other stuff we haven't announced yet. What I will say though is that the Witch as a character class is more about the hordes. And when you have a thing where you're like, the more like one minion that's really powerful type thing is more in other classes archetypes. So if you want to play the kind of like, I want a big tanky minion that's like just that I'm investing all in one, that's probably not the Witch that's going to be that. The Witch is more about the big army.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So,
another line. You want to go, DM?
I just had a quick question related to because you were talking about skills from other classes, etc. So one of the things I noticed is I was playing Monk, right, and I was using Quarterstaff, and then I got a Dagger, and I saw Dagger in the beginning of the passive tree, so I was like, Dagger probably works with Monk, so I went to use it, and most of my skills were not usable with the Dagger. But then later on, somebody noticed that, you can actually still cut gems from other classes if I wanted to use, a Witch skill or whatever, I could still use that on the Monk. But that made me wonder, if you're building so many skills based upon your Quarterstaff, etc., and then you go to use some sort of other abilities, a lot of the Witch ones, I'm assuming, are not going to work on a Quarterstaff. So is this going to be all the way until the release of the game? It's going to be this way where your skills are pretty honed down individually on weapons, or is there going to be a little bit of play in that?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that. So for one thing, spells can always be used from any weapon class. That's just the rule. It's the same as that in PoE 1 technically. The difference is that in PoE 1 we had a lot more skills that worked across different weapon classes. And that's something we've specifically decided not to do here. And the reason for that is because we've found that it really limited, in order to make a skill that works with like 3 or 4 weapon types, you end up like limiting what the skill can be. Because like generally speaking, like the most unique thing about a skill is kind of like something to do with the weapon that you're using it with. Now, one thing that I will say is that the way that that's presented in PoE 2 right now, I'm not fully happy with. What we had was, in the demo that you saw, was that each, the listing for uncut skills is all done class by class. And what that means is that people don't really get an understanding of like, okay, let's say you're playing a warrior and then you find an axe and you don't have any axe skills right now. You would just have no way of knowing that the thing you're supposed to do is go to Marauder to find that. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to change the uncut skill menu to list things by weapon type rather than by class. And that should mean that it's like more obvious that, okay, like, sure, I find an axe and that's cool, but like there was a section in that screen that said where all the axe skills are, and that's how I'm going to find those. And then for spells, we'll probably categorize them into a few things like elemental spells versus occult spells, something like that. And that should sort of end up with a situation where that's much more easy to understand. So something is interesting is that the people who were in that demo doing things cross-class did actually find quite a lot of things that were very synergistic that you can do. And the people who had the easiest time, honestly, were the people who were doing kind of weird cross-class stuff, even in that demo.
I actually really like the recommended approach. So the friend I brought, he was like the last time he played games was years ago, and he had an easy time learning Path of Exile, and I was just sitting there, jaw on the ground, being like, "You just said Path of Exile was easy to understand," and one of those things was that it was recommended. Like he would fully understand where to go, and I definitely like the idea with switching it with weapon types because he had no problems understanding the functionality of that.
Right.
I do have a follow-up minion question, just because it's me. So I was thinking about the new minions in PoE 2 we've seen, the bone constructs. Definitely the favorite ones that I got to try. But compared to PoE 1, you said Animate Guard is not in as of yet, but can we expect every single minion from PoE 1 to be a thing in PoE 2? And if not, why?
I mean, I'm not going to promise every single minion. Ultimately, it's more like when we reach to design another thing, the first thing we'll often do is like interesting theme that we can take and use and do in an interesting way. But at the same time, I think that like for the most part, basically, I think almost everything from PoE 1 should be in. There might be like 1 or 2 things that won't end up being in, but like generally speaking, they're all like any kind of favorite's going to be there. We don't have any particular reason why one thing appears or not as such. It's more just that like when we go to design something, like what's going to fill the niche that we're looking for and so on. And then of course there's always the thing of like, if something's a fan favorite, we want to be able to do something with that, right? Like anything that was really beloved, you want to have.
I like that answer.
So speaking of minions, I'll ask another minion question since it's a Witch chat. With a large army being something that we're going to be able to see, 1, do we have a cap on these? I know they're related to spirit. And 2, are they going to be able to body block you?
Right. So There is no inherent cap other than just spirit. So really, the balancing we're doing is just like what spirit costs are, how much spirit you can get, and like it's to do with how much it goes on the tree, how much is on the mods, all these different things. But there's no inherent limit. So if all you're trying to do is have the largest possible army, that is probably going to get quite outrageous. The kind of expectation is that in terms of permanent minions, you'll have something like 20 towards the end game, but you could go much higher than that if that's what if you want to do. But for the body blocking thing, I guess I've got another kind of interesting story during development because Witch was honestly one of those classes that was like one of the hardest to get right in our entire staple of classes. Like it took so long of all the different testing. So yeah, I'll talk a little about body blocking. So early on when we started doing the Witch, one of the things that seemed really obvious to us that we wanted to do was have formations. So we had a system where when the character is running around, the minions kind of form into lines like a sort of legion in front of you. And we thought that that was a really obvious thing to do and that would be really good. And like, it sounds like a good idea, right? Like it means that you're always protected and all that sort of stuff, right? But in order to do that, there was like quite a lot of concessions that had to be made with run speeds and blocking and everything to kind of get everything into formation again. Like it's very hard to like when if you turn suddenly, you've got to have like your whole formation kind of rotate, and it's quite complicated. There was a lot of code that went into like getting all of that stuff just right and all this sort of stuff. And we had that like that for a long time. And then when I was playing, I was just kind of like something about minions just didn't feel right, and I was very unclear to me what it even was. So we tried like all sorts of different things. Like we were playing around, like we played around a lot with the way that they resummoned and all sorts of stuff like this. And when I was playing with Unearth, which is like the bone constructs, and zombies, which are temporary minions, those ones weren't in formation. And I was having a great time with those when I wasn't having a great time with the permanent minions. And at first what I thought was that, it's the spirit reservation thing is just not working. I think we might have to change that. We might have to have a thing where you're back to resummoning manually every time. And like, I kind of came to this conclusion. I was kind of unhappy with it as well because I liked the way that system worked in theory, but I'm actually not having fun in practice with the permanent minions, whereas I am with the temporary ones. And I attributed that to the fact that they were temporary versus permanent. Whereas in the actual reason for the difference was that the permanent minions went in formation and the temporary ones didn't. So I just asked a programmer, hey, can you just add a quick thing so I can just turn this off, just disable it to see what it feels like? And immediately the minions felt way better. I think I've got sort of two theories as to why that is. And one of them is actually related to body blocking, which is when you have a bunch of minions just dogpiling on each other, it feels really like you don't get an understanding of what the hell's actually going on because it becomes unreadable in like a really bad way. And due to various other reasons, when the minion formations were there, you got that dogpiling effect happening, and the minions would just stack up, and it just kind of wasn't like fun somehow. So once we got rid of that and like the minions were able to body block each other again, then everything kind of worked out again and it was okay. So just to be clear, the minions can't body block you. You can always run through them and they can always run through you. But the minions do body block each other, and it turns out that that's really important just to make the combat feel readable and fun. Even as much as minions are like the most spammy, unreadable thing in the game right now, it still was a lot worse when they were able to intersect each other. So that one ended up being more important than I would have assumed, because it sounds like something that should be fine, but in reality, as I said, when you play it, it just kind of isn't. So once again, bit of a long-winded explanation, but that was like one thing that was a really hard lesson for us during development. So I thought I might as well share it.
That sounds great. I do have a follow-up question on the body blocking. We're talking about a plus minus 20 minutes end game play, but you can go higher. One of the very most popular builds that we're running in PoE1 is a Zoomancer build, which goes up to 40, 50, and pop vault summon skeletons. You're sitting at 70 plus minions. The downside of visual clarity, taking that aside, one of the problems is a lot of these minions are melee minions, and now they're not able to hit the targets. Now we circumvent this issue by convocating them on top of the targets for boss fights. So I guess the questions would then be, what is the thoughts or concerns regarding having such a large amount of minions in melee range trying to hit the targets when they are body blocking each other? Has that gone into?
So I think what you should do in that case is just build differently, so you've got more ranged minions. I will note, and something that kind of wasn't maybe clear in the video, so I'll just go into it, is that with specters, any monster can be a minion type, right? Like the game is your oyster as far as minion types, right? So if you want to have an army of cheap ranged minions, you can absolutely do that. In the video there, we didn't have it. It looked a bit different, the UI, than what we're going to have, because if as I said, like you can have like a ton of ranged minions just from that. So what I'm saying is I don't think players will feel limited to like, oh, the melee minions. I need to have lots and lots of melee minions. I think that you want to have exactly the right amount of melee minions to like protect the front line and have that work, and then fill out the rest with ranged minions who are going to be able to apply the DPS without without having to worry about body blocking. So yeah, I'd say that for this question, it's just build your minion army correctly, and you should be good.
Fair enough. I do have another follow-up question. Since you mentioned Unearth, it's definitely my favorite build or ability that I got to try in the playtest.
Right.
Fantastic. Even the artwork was built
Awesome.
absolutely insane. So when I playtested, I fell in love with this, obviously. But it felt a bit limited on bosses. Unlike other abilities like Absolution, DB, that allows you to trigger on hitting a unique enemy, you needed to kill or a corpse. But as far as I got into play, there was no way for me to generate corpses on demand on boss fights. So I guess the question would be, will we see something like a Desecrate skill in the future, or maybe have adjustment to this to have it trigger like Absolution or DB?
I'm actually not a fan of Desecrate at all. And one of the very earliest things we were talking about with regard to minions is Desecrate going to be a thing or not? The problem is that it effectively removes corpses as a viable cost, and corpses as a cost, as a resource for the character, I think has a lot of interesting things. So what we are doing is like, okay, so if in the case of zombies, for example, you can create zombies without corpses, but you need power charges. So during boss fights, there are ways to get power charges without having corpses around, and those will allow you to summon zombies. In the case of Unearth is basically just not a good ability for bosses. It's great for clearing, but not for bosses. Minions are actually another really challenging thing about minion balance, and once again, part of the like long storied crazy time that we had balancing minions is the boss damage. Effectively, minions are like amazing single target damage, like some of the best ever, because you've just got so many of them all wailing on one guy. So it's very hard to get the balance correct as far as like the amount of like making it so that clearing can happen, but also that bossing can happen. And effectively, the temporary minions are a kind of way to achieve that, because when clearing, you have more temporary minions. Your amount of AoE damage effectively goes up due to number of minions. But when you get into boss fights, the amount of single target damage effectively goes down a little bit compared to what it would be if you had all those same minions in a boss fight. And also in a boss fight, it means that because you don't have the amount of temporary minions, there tends to be more visual clarity, which is even more important during bossing when you need to see all the abilities and so on. So effectively, you will probably have less minions in a boss fight. As I said, that the 20 permanent is kind of about what I expect in an end game, but effectively you're always going to have generally less during boss fights due to the lack of the temporary ones. But I think that is actually a good thing for the feel. And the key thing was trying to make it so that the balance of minions felt about right. I actually think, by the way, that in the version you played, minions were still a little bit too OP against bosses. I think that they had like a little bit too of an easy of a time. There's been a slight reduction in that. The only thing we had to do was to add a very slight cooldown to the attack of warriors, and that was enough to kind of get it back in line again, so you don't quite have the same thing. Like when I say cooldown, it's just like a tiny little extension to their attack time, and that kind of immediately solved that again. But yeah, like it was slightly too high, I think, in the demo you played. But yeah, it's all about that thing of trying to balance the boss fighting versus clearing. Like it is hard with minions, another one of those big challenges.
Oh, for sure.
I have a follow.
Go for it.
I have a follow-up question about power charges. I don't know if this is just something I didn't realize, or maybe it wasn't immediately obvious, but when you have power charges and you use an ability that consumes power charges when you use it, then what's going to happen is it's going to delete them and attack with it. But if you wanted to keep those power charges maybe for something else later, is there any way in the game actually to make it where I'm going to cast this ability without empowering it with the empower charges? Because I ran into this with the monk, for instance, with Falling Thunder.
Right. So there actually isn't, and if that's a thing that you want, so one of the things that we could consider changing is right now most power charge abilities, not all of them, but most of them take all power charges rather than just one. And I think there's probably a lot of cases where you probably wouldn't want that. So I guess we have two solutions to that. One of them would just be changing the skills of people. That's a constant complaint. Like I know that's a thing that people might prefer to not have with what's it called, Falling Thunder. But the other possibility is if we want to have changes to skills like this, then support gems are always an option. We could have a support gem that kind of changes the behavior around power charges. And that's kind of an interesting one that I guess I hadn't considered that as a support gem before this moment. But yeah, that's a potential option for adding a way to be able to do that. But yeah, understood.
All right. I had a follow-up question on the Spectres. Now, obviously, Spectres is close to a lot of us hearts. we got to confirm last XLCon that was going to be a Pokemon approach. We got to see the iteration of that right now. Looks fantastic. However, does that mean when you choose the quantity of it and you have this bound spectrable unit, now I can only choose the amount of quantity I want of that specific unit? So the follow-up question is then, can we have multiple of these spectre skills so that we can have different specters, or will we always be locked in one choice?
So basically, you can have as many specters on your build as you want, and each gem allows you to summon as many of that type as you want. So effectively, that means that you can do an entire spectre minion build if you want. You don't need to use the skeletons at all. It's just like anything in the game, just have a whole army. Like army composition is whatever. And I'm sure it's going to be a balanced nightmare as we go in there. People find, because there's like 600 monsters in the game, so we have to make sure that the spirit balance is correct for all of them. But, that's the job we signed up for here. So, that's what we want to do.
I noticed in the video it said any minion for Spectre. Is that truly any monster, any mob? Or is there any...
Any monster that isn't a unique can be turned into a Spectre, yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Minion control, obviously a big question. We talked a little bit about convocation, so I guess we could have a small addition there. Convocation, are we going to see it, yes or no?
There might be a world in which something like that could happen, but I certainly wouldn't want it to be that you can teleport every single minion that you've got into one location all at the same time. I think it's probably not okay as far as balance goes. Or like what it would effectively mean is the balance you'd have to end up with on the minions, I think probably would make that not as fun. So I think that if Convocation were to return, it would have to be a slightly different approach. There are things that you could do with support gems along these lines potentially, which are interesting. So I'd have to really sort of have a think about that. But I don't think it can return in just the way that it is now. It would just teleport every single minion you have to one location.
That's fair. So in PoE 1, we have Meixsell, we have Feeding Frenzy, being the AI altering approaches. Mm-hmm. They do not work that way in PoE 1. PoE 2. Could you walk us through how this will work, move it into PoE 2?
So you're talking about the things that change the Minion AI, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So I think that we still are open to doing more Minion AI changes in the form of support gems, but we weren't really that I think we need to sort of still think a little bit more about what that's going to be. I wasn't quite happy with exactly how they work in PoE 1 for a few reasons. So in the end, what we decided to do, just for the at least for the current support gems on minions, was just make them just power gems rather than having AI effects. But I'm still interested in potentially changing some stuff around that. Minion AI is like another whole thing that needs a little bit of still some work. I mean, I think we still improved it quite a lot from PoE 1, but that's a whole other area as well. As I said, I'm still open to AI affecting support gems, but we just decided not for this demo since we weren't quite happy exactly with what we had there at this point.
From my personal experience, I'll just say this, that not having that on support gems felt amazing. Because the AI felt good, and the player agency control of being able to tell which target to attack with a separate
right. So yeah, having the direct control does effectively mean that a lot of what you might have wanted that for is probably gone. But I can still imagine some scenarios. I mean, there's some things we're thinking about, but all of them's kind of currently on the cutting room floor. Like we need some to relook at that and see exactly what we want to do there.
So, with early access being available later this year, is the Witch and all of the classes going to be available in early access?
So our hope was to have every class available in early access, but I don't think we're going to be able to quite have all of them. I just don't think they're quite going to be ready. We will certainly have enough that any kind of major archetype should be covered as far as there's going to be melee and ranged and sorceresses and summoners and all that sort of stuff, right? They're going to have all that stuff. But I don't know if we'll be able to have literally every class in the early access initially. We certainly will need to have them all by the time we go out of early access. So, we'll need to do all that because we need to make sure they all get tested. But it's looking like maybe we won't have all of them for early access, unfortunately. But as I said, should be most.
Fair enough. You talked about earlier with the idea of Animate Guardian, and we briefly touched upon this single big minion focus, and you mentioned that being maybe not so much in the Necromancer or the Witch expertise. So in PoE 1, we have Reaper being one of the coolest looking minions that we've seen in recent times. It caters to that single powerful minion fantasy. So I guess we kind of got the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your thoughts more in depth with the catering to that playstyle moving forward in PoE 2. Is that something already done, or what are we looking at?
We have something along these lines, but we're not ready to talk about it yet. We'll have to show you that at a different time. But yeah, there is some interesting stuff along those lines coming.
Awesome.
So I wanted to... Oh, go on, GHAZZY.
No, go for it.
Okay, sure. I wanted to do basically a repeat of a question I asked you earlier. Now that we're sort of on the podcast here, in relation to the linearness of campaigns. So in the first playtest, what we had is we had basically a sequence break you could sort of do where you could just kind of go into Act 2. But when we playtested the second playtest, you forced it by adding keys. Basically, you have to acquire, but so you actually experience all of the bosses. So my question for you is, are you guys preferring the linearness of a campaign in which you can predict basically where the players are going to go in order to be able to have higher quality, or do you prefer personally more of an exploration variety of the campaign? I thought the answer you gave on this one earlier was really interesting.
Right. So the particular case where you're talking about is in the graveyard, where you had to in the previous demo we didn't have that we didn't have that locked off. And the issue that we had was, especially early game, is that the difference in levels between what you could have if you did that versus when you didn't do it was just too high. So we're kind of running into balance problems with that. So effectively, in that particular case, we decided to make it so that you had to do those other bosses. That being said, there's still a lot of optional bosses in the game. Like, there's tons of different things. We actually even added more from the last demo to this one. And it's possible there's even ones that you didn't happen to notice. Like, since so many areas have optional bosses, and then there's also lots of optional side content as well. The stuff you might encounter is quite variable. But as you get further and further into the game, there's actually more and more optionality going on. Like, as the levels get as you get further into the game, the difference between levels is not quite so extreme. So in Act 2, there's a part where you split off into different areas, and in Act 4, you split off. And the way we're actually handling that in the later areas is that when you complete one of those areas, it levels up one of the other paths. So in Act 2, there's like 3 different branches that you can go down. When you finish one, the other one levels up an extra level, and then when you finish 2 of them, the last one levels up a couple of levels. And so that kind of allows us to do that branching without having so many problems. And then Act 4, it's like that as well, where every time you complete an island, all the other islands level up by 1 level. So that effectively allows us to have that like branching thing going on. But another sort of thing that is going on that's really not been obvious, we've talked about it a little bit, but not too much, is that the actual league itself has a random seed. And when you open the world map is actually random. So the layout of the overall world is also a random element, and so each time someone plays League, you're going to have a different experience. So once again, in Act 4, we actually move the quest objectives around each League. Most of the acts are generally the same overall, sort of like for the most part, very similar. But the layout of the map is different, and which means that they're going to, you're going to find things in different directions. You can't just kind of learn the map in the same way. Even within the proceduralness of it, you can't learn the map in the same way. Like, each League, it's going to be a new experience. So that's sort of another thing that we had going on in order to prevent the situation where, you get in PoE 1 where, there are just certain signs, even though it is random, there's certain signs that you sort of just learn to, know exactly where stuff is. And by having it more random, each League, you'll have to rediscover a few things. And there's even stuff like whole, tiles that just won't show up in one versus the other. An example of that is at the start of the game in the second area. There's like a river that it's like the river that you get chucked into and then you wake up on the beach of, right? So in some random seeds, you have to cross back over that river to sort of get to the other side, and others you don't. So you kind of have this thing where this bridge crossing in the second area is a thing that you'll get in some versus the others, and it's just kind of a bit interesting.
I love that, because I remember there was, I think it was Carvarusk, it was just dug deep on this in PoE 1. Piety, when you get down to level 2, depending on the tile that your character's left foot is standing on will dictate which way to go. And I shit, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But before that, there's two carts on one side, one cart on one side.
Right.
So yeah, it can get pretty extreme. I did have a quick question when it comes to these links. Going back to that really before I forget. In the first playtest, we had colors, chromatic.
Yes, you did.
This playtest, we had none. And for my new player friend, he loved it. And I was just sitting there, they're all white. Yeah. Can you explain?
Basically, we didn't feel like the colors were really adding anything. At the end of the day, there are still attribute requirements on support gems. And given that there are attribute requirements, what really is the point of the colors? Like it just kind of didn't make sense anymore. So yeah, we removed colors and we didn't look back, and there was just a change that just made things better. And as I said, wasn't really doing anything for us. It's a sort of a slight shame to lose, just entirely just for PoE iconicness. But at the same time, yeah, if it's not serving the gameplay, then there's no reason to have it. So we ended up just getting rid of it. And as I said, it's funny because you're the first person to even actually comment to me about this, which means that like all these people who are at the event just like didn't even really think about it. And I guess that shows you that it really wasn't that important in the end, as much as like we kind of thought that maybe it was.
I was preparing to help my friend out explaining the chromatics, the colors. And then I saw they were white. I was like, "Oh, thank God! This is the way it is in the playtest, at least." I was like, "That's good." But then I gotta ask you, if that's actually gonna be, yeah.
It's just
another follow-up question had to what was DM was talking about in the answer you had earlier was in this shifting areas, right? As you progress, different from league to league, so to say. The area before the farmlands, there was this big totem area, and it was like we talked about this at the event a little bit. And when you talked about it, you explained what that was supposed to be, which was not in the playtest for us.
Yeah.
It sounded amazing. So I was hoping you could reiterate what we were talking about here on the show today, because that sounded great.
So this is just one of those sort of random encounters that we're spreading more and more of through the game as we're kind of going through this phase of it. So I think the thing you found was the one where you've got a bunch of saprolings that are kind of like chanting and summoning this like larger sort of treant thing. And what that effectively is a it's not a boss. Like we've got a boss of that area, which is Crowbell. But we kind of want to have other opportunities to just find some interesting thing. And in this case, it was like a rare that would be a monster that would show up later in the game, but we're using it as a rare, as like a special monster just for this area. So there's another one of those in the forest, which is the witch that you find in this like witch's hut. I don't know if you found it in your playthrough or not, but if you did, what that technically is a monster that was in actually, in fact, people have seen that monster because it was in the mercenary demo. In the mercenary demo, there's these like howling, like screaming witches. And effectively, we were able to take that monster and turn it into into like effectively like a little mini boss encounter, but it's technically not a unique. It's just a rare. And the funny thing about this, in my opinion, is that a lot of games' bosses are kind of this like the actual bosses of this. But in our game, it's like this is just like an extra boss we're throwing. Like, so every area kind of has this another boss, you know what I mean? That's just like this afterthought that like is still fun because it's just like a monster from later on in the game. But when you get one of these later game monsters in an early area, it does feel boss enough to you. And we can do things like dropping extra skill gems or extra support gems and things like that. Like just hard-coded drops that effectively like if you are having trouble with like the actual boss of the area or just something later on in the game, you can kind of go and find these things and they're going to drop these like specific other things that you can use to help with your build and help you along. So that's what these are about. That particular one wasn't in the game when you guys found it. I think it was just a thing that did nothing. But that room is designed for that stuff. And yeah, we're trying to have like, at least a few in every area, at least a few interesting things that you can find like that, where it's just like an extra little encounter, an extra like weird little thing. Like, I don't know if you saw the secret room that was in one of the tombs under the graveyard. There's like a lever on the wall you can press, and if that'll open up a little thing, and there's like gold in there, and like there's just like little things like that we're kind of like putting around and doing more of this in this phase. So it's kind of fun to have these extra little points of interest. And what I'll say is that anytime you see a checkpoint where it's not like a through line, like if it's a checkpoint at a dead end, there's probably a reason why that checkpoint is there, because it indicates there's something to find in that room, like something about it. So
that's how I got stuck in that area and found that, because we ran into this checkpoint. It was like, there's gotta be something here. I was going crazy. We cleared the entire zone. Where is it?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that some of them in the demo just weren't like we hadn't hooked up the final thing there. But yeah, basically anywhere there's a checkpoint there where it's not like a through line, it is going to be some kind of thing. So yeah.
Speaking of extra like bosses and things you can find, I noticed that some of these bosses give like pretty good buffs, like 10% code resistance, etc. So by in-game, are you basically expected, and it's balanced around, like you should have gone back, acquired these different permanent buffs on your character? Is that something you're expecting players to have accomplished by then?
I think you'll want to do it. I think at the moment there's approximately 2 of them per act, roughly. So then by the end of the game, you'd expect about sort of 10 to 12 of these types of bonuses. My expectation is that you'll probably end up doing at least slightly more than half of them just naturally as you go through the game. But yeah, you'll probably want to go back and get them. I mean, there's things like 10% cold resist and stuff like that. That's, that first one is that. So they are enticing to do. We really wanted to make sure that the uniques as you go through the game have like every time you play through, there is the consideration of should I be running this to get the stuff that it drops. And another thing that I think is maybe we haven't talked too much about, but is the case is that the first time you kill a unique on a character in PoE 2, the drops are a lot better. And so what that means is that well, as you're going through the campaign, even multiple times, like in different leagues, there's a lot of incentive to go and do that to increase the power of your character. Like it effectively means that the more bosses you kill, the more powerful you're going to get. So that bonus there kind of keeps the gives you a nice reason to explore and find things.
Awesome. When Spirit now being the resource for both auras and your permanent minions, how is this going to impact the weapon swap mechanic moving forward for the Witch? And I'd like to mention that about, I think it was 9 months ago at Gamescom, we got the teaser for the Druid shapeshifting, and that one had a third option being considered a weapon swap. Could you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, so basically, the spirit thing. So the spirit will change when you weapon swap. However, and we've got a feature we're planning to add, it hasn't been done yet, where you can effectively lock a weapon so that it is in both weapon sets. Which means that if you've got like a scepter, where you've got like a nice rolled scepter with lots of spirit on it, and you don't want your minions to die when you change to the other set, you effectively lock that weapon in place, and now you've got it for both weapon sets. And that way you can like have two different wands depending on what it is you want to do. If you want to do like shield versus wand or something like that, that should be something you can do as well. So basically that's the sort of solution to that problem. The Druid is an interesting case because the Druid, of course, when he's a bear, you're not holding any weapons, which means that you have to have another way of getting spirit while you're a bear. And I believe the plan was to have some passive tree support effectively for this, so that like you get like spirit while you're in your animal form. There might have been a few different other things that we had around this, but effectively yes. There needs to be a way to get spirit while you're a bear, because you can't hold a scepter in your claws. So that's an issue.
If there's a will, there's a way, though.
Right.
So speaking of druids, druid companions or something we saw in one of the previous teasers. Does this mean we can expect kind of summoner fantasy playstyles outside of just like the atypical, necromancer?
Yeah, so there are minion type things kind of all over a lot of different classes. It's just like they've all got their own sort of thing going on with them. It's just that the Witch is the one where it's like, okay, you want to have a giant zoo, that's the big horde. But all characters, generally speaking, there's going to be some sort of minion that will be interesting and possible for you to use around them. They're just different themes.
Awesome. Speaking of a little bit of touching upon minions, but a statement you guys made quite some time ago was that PoE 1 MTXs would be able to be used in PoE 2. So is this going to be for all of it? Are we talking about minions like skeletons, MTXs, and even like the flying body armor MTX? Or is there any limitation?
So certainly all armors and everything are going to work. The thing that's interesting is coming down to skills. So the thing here, so to the greatest extent possible, I want to make it so this stuff works. The question is like, okay, let's say you've got a Righteous Fire MTX in PoE 1. And the way Righteous Fire works in PoE 2, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but basically it's different than the way it worked in PoE 1. So on some level, the question is it the same skill or is it a different skill? Now, I would hope that, as I said, to the greatest extent possible, we can make that work. But in some cases, the skill might be so changed that it just kind of becomes not like really correct for this MTX to work anymore. So then we come to skeletons, which is the one you asked about, and like that's an interesting one. I mean, I want that to work, but like the way the skill worked in PoE 1 is different than PoE 2. So then once again, it's the question is it the same skill or isn't it? And I honestly don't have an answer to you about that one. It's going to have to come down to when I actually go to look at that particular MTX and see like, okay, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? What's it going to take to make this happen? Like that'll be the question. So effectively, I think skills are going to be more iffy in some cases just due to the functionality changes. But certainly the flying body armor will work. Like it's a recent MTX. Like there's no reason why that wouldn't work. Like we designed like anything we've been making in the last like 5 years, we've really been having PoE 2 in mind as we're making them, right? Like we're rigging them to the PoE 2 rig for anything recent that we're doing. So make sure that that'll be there on release. So yeah, as I said, to the greatest extent possible, make it work. Just in some cases, it might be hard for various reasons. So yeah,
Understandable.
you'll see. Yeah.
Thank you. You want to go for this one, DM?
1 second here. I'm trying to pull up the next one. We're kind of burning through our questions here. So PoE and MTX.
No, go for it.
So I did see one question related to MTX in the chat. When early access comes, can we expect some new supporter packs that will have these in association with them?
Yeah, there'll be supporter packs around early access for sure.
There you go. And then I'll ask a follow-up question here. So co-op, we're going to go back to co-op here. One of the questions I was asking you about earlier was about co-op and Jimro and the balance around co-op. Can you explain how you guys actually do manage to balance co-op? And then I have one other follow-up after that.
Yeah. So basically, co-op is balanced the same way as parties are. So effectively, it's like being in a two-person party. And what that means is that you've got extra life on monsters. We actually have different amounts, like in PoE 1. Actually, we do have different amounts of life for different monsters by rarity. So normal monsters, I think, 150%. A unique monster is 100%, or it might even be 110% or something like that. It's like slightly higher, I think, even due to the synergy that you get between players. So that effectively comes down to the fact that when you're fighting a boss, everyone's just going to be concentrating on that one boss. You get very good synergy. It makes sense. Some people are surprised to learn that we don't do damage increases, and the reason for that is because you still have the same amount of life. Like, if a monster hits you, you need to die in the same number of hits. So effectively, that means we don't increase damage, just life. But the other thing, of course, that we increase is items, and we do actually have a different way of doing that than what we had in PoE 1. So in PoE 1, we have a bonus to quantity and rarity. And there was no real intelligence behind that because it was just like, I don't even remember the number now. I think it might have been like 30% quant or something like that, and some amount of rarity. Now in PoE 2, we kind of take a look at this again and we realized, like, when you're playing with another player, you don't necessarily need more like weapons, because most of the time you're going to be playing different classes. The number of weapons that drop doesn't really, having extra weapons is not going to do anything for you. It's just cluttering the ground. But you do need, like, twice as much jewelry, because jewelry works for everyone. You do need twice as much currency. You do need twice as much of various things. And then, like, for the case of armors, usually there's like a little bit of overlap, but not totally. So, for that one, we've got like a 33% increase, for example. So basically, we looked at each type of item that can drop, and we said, like, how much more do you need of that when you're in a party? And then we effectively made it so the drops respect that. And what it ends up being is that you only actually get, in terms of number of items on the ground, I think it's like some number like 13% more items on the ground. But the items you get extra are all the ones you actually need extra as you're a party. So it feels like you're still getting enough. So that strategy just kind of means that that you get a much better experience with regard to the sort of item drops on the ground in party play. The other thing, of course, with party balance is all the synergy between character classes. So that area is complicated in PoE 2 particularly because there's a lot more like state that matters between your characters. So for example, like, one character can be freezing, the other player can be utilizing the freeze, one player's armor breaking, the other person utilizing it, that kind of stuff. Also things like the bell, you place down an object, both players can interact with that object. So there's a lot more going on with that. And there was actually a question that came up recently about, like, what is the role of support characters in PoE 2? Like, are you going to have, just like aura bots and so on? I mean, we will have auras, but I think a lot of the time in PoE 2, when you're thinking about how I can support another character, a lot of it's going to come around more to, like, what thing can I be doing that the other player can take advantage of, in terms of like debuffs I can apply and things like that. And not just in a like stat way, but in like an actual, like, I set this up, you knock it down kind of thing. So I think all of that stuff can be a lot more interesting in PoE 2 than it is in PoE 1. So yeah, it's just the addition of a lot more state and a lot more things, a lot more of that comboing stuff, and particularly between classes, effectively allows everything to be, in my opinion, a lot more interesting with regard to that stuff.
So because you guys are having it where it's sort of drop in, drop out, easy enough co-op, right? One of the things I noticed is you can hit the trade button and just immediately trade something across the inventory when you're playing couch co-op. This was really awesome. Like, this was surprisingly how smooth it was. But it made me wonder, is this going to be the way that trade works in particular? Or I'm assuming when you have somebody else in your party that's not localized co-op, there's going to be a trade window separate.
Yeah. So there's we've got a trade window just like in PoE 1. Of course, there's also the larger trade system that I've talked about in a couple of other podcasts before, which is another whole topic that we don't necessarily have to go into. But
sure.
We are a game that doesn't like to do binding. We like to have things be free tradable. So basically, we want to have all those different options as far as transferring items between players.
And when it comes to the balance of the co-op, you're talking about support characters. So I mentioned this to you as one of the feedback points. I noticed that what you can literally do is just have like a witch, for instance, summoning minions, and then the witch just goes with you on your map while you're walking and can make it easier. And GHAZZY before the podcast was talking about how maybe what you could do is just have like an aura bot, type of character, like a support character. If there comes out with some support builds, it might actually be good just to play two characters on the screen with the co-op mode available. Is this something you guys are wanting to be possible? Is this something you're okay
no.
with?
So we'll need to do something about that. I don't know quite what the solution is yet, but you're completely right about the minion in co-op and dragging the other player around thing. It's not okay. So we'll need to find some kind of solution. I'm sure we'll be able to find something. It might end up being a bit hacky, but because it's sort of something that would only come up in an abusive case anyway, like the solution to it can kind of be like a bit random, I suspect. But yeah, we'll work that out. And the same is true of the aura thing as well. We'll just need to find some kind of solution that's going to make that not that kind of, I mean, clearly that behavior isn't really like desirable, right? Like you don't want to make it so the best thing to do is to play in co-op and like drag another player around with you. Like that's not like a fun thing to need to be the thing you need to do. So
I will say I like that you had the dragging mechanic in the game though, because my buddy's like, I gotta go use the restroom, and then when we figured that out, it's like he can just go for like 30 seconds, get a snack, whatever. I'm still blasting the game, no problem. It was that part itself was smooth. So thank you for having that.
No, you definitely need the dragging, but it's just obviously there are a couple of abuse cases we need to deal with.
No, for sure. I had a follow-up question on the idea that you said that in co-op or multiplayer you'd have a slight increase in quantity items. So this obviously leads into magic find question, quantity, rarity, the functionality, risk of bloat. What's the deal there?
So basically, there isn't any quantity increases at all in PoE 2 except for map mod. Not map mods. No, map mods don't even do it. No, just parties. And the magic and the bonus to quantity you get from magic monsters and rare monsters and unique monsters. So effectively, like the amount of the stuff that can matter is drastically reduced. Now, rarity is still a thing in the game, but effectively, I don't believe it will be a problem because it's effectively going to return back to what it was like in the early PoE 1 days, where the amount of magic find you can get was not so high that it actually drove this like kind of, I guess I would say like not so great behavior, where like the thing you want to do is just use all magic find gear. So I still think like I've talked about this a couple of times before, and at the time I kind of hadn't fully formed my thoughts on it, but effectively I do believe that it can be fine to have a little bit of magic find stuff in the game, and the evidence for that effectively is that PoE 1 was fine early on. It just wasn't an issue. So effectively I don't think that we're going to fall back into the same hole that we ended up with in PoE 1. But yeah, the whole way the drop system works is quite different in PoE 2 as well, because the rarity now changes the value of items in different ways. Like when you have rarity, you get higher tier currency. You don't need to increase quant to get more currency anymore. It's not like that. Like rarity will do it, and like that means that like the way the whole drop system works, the way map mods can work, the way like so many different things can work is just so much better, and will just lead to a situation where you don't end up with just like ridiculous screeds of items everywhere. Like you'll just end up with better items, like just stuff that not just stuff you want, obviously, but like. Like putting map mods on items is not going to result in like on like just way more shit. It's going to result in like better stuff. So that will just improve things substantially.
When you say better stuff, I do have a follow-up question, but for those of you who haven't heard you explain this, could you elaborate on what you mean with better items?
Yeah, so we've got quite a lot of different things going on with it, but for one thing, it's the currency, just like I said. In the case of we've also done things with the way unique drops work, where like the rarer ones can will happen as you get more, like as like rarity in PoE 1 doesn't work that way. Like once something's rolled unique, that's it. But in PoE 2 it works differently. There's also another system that we have where the mods on rares can be influenced by the rarity you had when they dropped, and the way that you see that is you'll see a rare drop that says like tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 4 like going up, and what that means is that when you identify that rare, the mods that the mods that it can have well not that it can have, but the mods that we futz with the randomness in such a way that the rare is going to be better, basically. So if you see like a T5 rare as opposed to a T, like you might be leaving T1 rares on the ground while picking up T5 rares because you know that the T5 rares are actually going to, like have good mods. So this can actually mean that there's more room within a rare without changing the number of affixes that they have to change the value of a rare when you pick it up. And that I think is a much better solution than what we had before.
Yeah. Now, I remember you talking about this at the event. I love the idea of it. I really do. It removes the bloat that we have in PoE1, right?
Right.
Where loot filters just, hide 95% of the items.
Right.
But I did have a follow-up question, which has been bugging me since I flew home. Why would the rare items that are stronger have a higher number on the tier when modifiers on gear are better with a lower numerical value? Why the opposite change here?
The reason why that is because I didn't want to, like, you see a rare, right, that has no tier on it, because that's like the bottom tier, and then you see another rare when you get the upgrades and it says T6, that would feel weird. Like, you kind of need to go in that direction, unfortunately. Now, you could argue that we shouldn't be using the word tier for this because people are used to with mods, the tiers going the other direction. That's kind of I will say this is something that was brought up by people in the office, and I was kind of like, I just don't think we can do it the opposite way around, unfortunately. What I will probably do, by the way, is not actually even say, like, currently it just says words T6, but what we probably should do is put some kind of icon. Doesn't even say the word tier, just so that people don't get confused by that. Like, there's probably some better thing we can do that way. But for now, we just put text there just to make it easy. So we'll probably do something like that.
Well, it makes sense, the explanation at least. Thank you.
So got a minion question here. You want to ask the Reaper question, or should I?
I think we did that one already.
Did we already go through this?
This is what happens. Well, it's so hard to prepare questions like this since we get the interview and the reveal and then immediately into the interview. The video was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We did prepare some backup questions, and
I can also ask one about HDR. People in chat, I'm seeing quite a bit of questions about related to HDR native support. Is that something you guys?
Right. Okay. It's actually not in the game right now, and it's something that I would love to do, but we've kind of we kind of haven't really had great time to be able to really go into that. It's probably irrelevant, but I've got some weird thoughts about HDR, and I probably just shouldn't go into it because it's a whole not really important. But we don't currently support HDR. It's something that I would like to support.
Okay, so I'll do a follow-up about, you were talking earlier about how some of the skills are fundamentally changing, and you mentioned Righteous Fire, but is this something we can expect from a good number of skills, which it's sort of in name only it's the same, or they're pseudo changing?
Yeah, I think so, and to some extent this is just because when we're designing a skill for PoE2, we can't just design a skill no skill can be this is the only skill you use, right? It always has to be the question of how can this interact with the things, what keywords can we think about. There has to be some level of interaction there, and PoE1 skills are just not designed that way. So just on a very fundamental level, a skill has to have some sort of place within the overall ecosystem. So yes, I like to try and bring back the feel of a skill from PoE1, even if it's not going to work exactly mechanically the same. And always there's going to be crowd favorites. And there's always just the thing of when you're a player, you're like, oh, I wonder how they changed this skill. What's the skill going to be like when you see it in PoE2? Yes, I guess you could say that some things are kind of in name only, but they're still going to have the same kind of theme and overall kind of vibe, I would say, as what they had before.
Fair. I was curious about when we talked about the Reaper earlier and the different fantasies to engage with one big minion or all those things. I'd actually like to hear your philosophies around the quantity of fantasies that you'd like to have per class. Is there something like a limit or a threshold you want to reach, or it's just as far as you want?
The quantity of fantasies, did you say?
That you'd like to have as a playable approach.
So I mean, when we're designing classes, we usually have 3 kind of overall themes in mind for each class. But of course, there's all the mixing and matching you can do. But in terms of a sort of solid theme, you've got 3 of them. And in the case of the Witch, for example, the 3 kind of major themes would be the kind of the minion summoning theme, the chaos debuff type theme, and the bone skill theme. But the intention is there's so much cross pollination between them that you're going to want to use more than one of those when you're actually building. But ultimately, you've kind of got those 3 sort of major elements. And that's usually kind of how we're thinking about each class. But as I said, like I don't want to just be that it's the case where you just pick one and just do that, right? Like that shouldn't be the thing. And funnily enough, on the sorceress, we've actually found that uh, it's actually a mistake to only pick one element. Like you want to pick more. Like for power, like there are reasons to use things across elements. But it is a very common thing where people just like, I'm going fire, I'm just going to pick the fire skill every time. And yeah, that's actually something that it's better not to do it that way. Like you want to explore things across the themes as well.
That's interesting because it's like something that PoE2 is doing exceptionally well is providing information. I know you and I talked about this for many times over. Providing enough information so that the player can make a functional and progression rewarding decision with that information. Some parts of it, because I feel like a lot of us that are coming from PoE1 that are not new players to Path of Exile has the mentality, like you said, oh, I'm just going to go fire, so I'm going to go fire, fire, fire. Anything that buffs fire, I'm going to use that. So how do you bridge that gap, telegraph that type of information to those players so that we get into the right state of mind, if you will?
Well, one of the things is, just those videos that we've got on the skills that kind of show you, like we are showing some of the cross theme synergies in those videos, and I think that can help. And like a lot of people are prepared to watch stuff like that. So I mean, a great example being like the firewall where you can fire projectiles through, and the demo we do of that is specifically a not fire skill that we're using it with in the video, just so that you key onto the fact that okay, it would be a good thing to do something across class like that. But at the same time, like, look, if you do just want to go fire, 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 like, sure, you're not going to be as powerful if you don't do that, but it will work, right? Like, you can do that. It's just, like, you're missing out on some other stuff, and I think people will learn that and they'll try things out. And the other thing, of course, we can do is just give you more skill gems than what you need to just pick only fire, right? If you're like, well, I've got this extra skill gem, I might as well give it a shot. Like, there's no harm in it, and then hopefully people will find things that way as well.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions I asked you earlier in LA was about the passive skill tree, and you had an answer where you're responding about how it's fundamentally going to change a little bit. I was hoping you could explain that same concept to the people in this podcast about how, depending upon which class, which class.
Oh yeah, that one. Right. Yeah, okay, right. So this is actually another thing. Yeah. So this one's sort of interesting. So recently we ran into the problem, and this was actually another Minion problem in particular, where we were really struggling with designing the start of the skill tree to work with both the witch and the sorceress. And the funny thing about this one is that part of the reason why it's hard is because people are really not willing to pick a node that has something on it that they can't use. So if you have a node that's like plus spell and minion damage, then people who aren't minion players will still not want to pick that. Because even though it's the same spell damage that they would have gotten if they had, like otherwise anyway. And that's just kind of one of those psychological things that, you just have to live with. People are just like that. So what we decided that we wanted to do was we're actually going to have it so that the starting area of the skill tree of each class is going to have 3 versions. One of them is for the witch case, for example, one of them is if you picked witch, one of them is if you picked sorceress, and the other one is what you get if you picked neither witch nor sorceress. So if you're another class coming from another part of the tree, then the starting area of the witch and sorceress is going to have like a sort of combo of what the witch and the sorceress both get, so that like those things are where you can go to get that. And that actually solved a lot of our problems because it made the starting area kind of now be able to be the case where like all the stuff that's there is going to be relevant to your character, that means that like right at the beginning of the game, there's less kind of like wrong choices. Like when we had the situation where you've got like some minion passes and you've got some elemental passes, it's very easy for a player to just pick the elemental stuff when they're playing a witch or whatever. So that's changed there, like really helped us with being able to sort that stuff out. But I think it's pretty interesting also to have the third thing for when you're not playing either character, because it means we can put stuff there that kind of makes sense and is balanced for when you're coming there from somewhere else. And we've actually had problems in the past in PoE1 with the balance of the initial nodes, because you have to balance them in a way where they're powerful right at the start, so you kind of get the feeling of like good progression there. But that has sometimes meant that the nodes are too powerful when you come from another class to go there and grab them. So having control over that, it kind of lets us make sure we've got that balance lever for the other classes as well and kind of control that a little bit. This is a little thing that we're experimenting with at the moment. As I said, it works really well for the witch and sorceress. We're planning on applying it to all the other classes as well.
For a quick follow-up question on the skill tree. First off, that sounds amazing. It really does. It sounds like a terrible workload for PUB devs, but that's not my problem. Cluster jewels. What's your thoughts on that when it comes to PoE 2, hearing these changes?
I think they're cool, but I don't know that we're going to have them at the start of early access. Honestly, it feels like kind of one of those things that would be more reasonable to add in later content as like another thing. But I think they're cool. So yeah, I'm sure they'll come back at some point.
Fair enough. Another follow-up question I had was regarding the idea of the fantasies. We haven't seen any ascendancies yet, and we're still X amount of time away from early access and all those things. So I was very curious if there were plans regards to having more playtests for the classes we still haven't seen and so forth. Is that something you're planning to do?
We're definitely going to be doing more playtests. There's definitely a lot more stuff going on, like with that stuff. Obviously, like it's just that ascendancies are like we really don't want to do them until we're ready. Like we really don't want to show people them until we're really ready for them. And there's a lot of stuff like the balance complexity around them is very high. We don't want to show someone something and then be like, I mean, we did show some stuff at ExileCon 2019, and the balance from then is probably like way different than what they would need to be now. So therefore we just kind of want to be very careful with regard to that announcement. And basically what I'm saying is, yeah, we'll announce them later on. But yeah, there'll be more playtests. We'll do more stuff. Those events are really fun to do. Like getting a bunch of community members over and getting them to do stuff. So yeah, I'm sure we'll do another one of those. And then look, there's other events that we'll go to as well. We'll be at Gamescom later on in the year. Like we'll be around. We'll be doing some stuff.
Someone was asking in the chat earlier, actually, about the Gamescom and asking if you guys were going to have couch co-op available to be played there.
Very likely. I don't know if the full booth design locks down, but I think that I would be keen to do that. I think it'll be a really fun thing to do. So yeah, why not, right? We should probably do that.
And couch co-op is confirmed. You can factually do this on your computer as well, right? This is not just a console thing. You can absolutely plug in.
Yep. Anywhere you got two controllers, you can do it.
On the topic of play testing, so we both noticed a lot of changes in the potion acquisition, and that was a result of direct feedback from that playtest, right? And the question is, what was the largest feedback you're seeing from this playtest that you think you'll be addressing moving forward?
Right. I actually think I already answered that one, which was that console controller versus mouse and keyboard switch over thing. But I mean, in terms of other stuff, like let me just think about that. If there's anything else really large. Honestly, like there wasn't that much this time. It's funny because last time we went into the the previous playtest, I probably went in a bit overconfident, and we received a lot of like negative feedback about various different things. And this time I was ultra unconfident. I was like feeling, because like from the last one, right? I was like, oh my God, I really hope that we've like addressed everything that everyone said. I'm worried that we're still going to have all these blind spots and we're not going to get things right. And so this time I was like pleasantly surprised to the degree to which things were actually okay. So hopefully I don't then get overconfidence for the next playtest and immediately screw myself over again. But effectively, yeah, like it ended up kind of being that like other than like a few like things that kind of aren't even really like sort of major game problems, like it was mostly fine. Like we did okay.
It was a significant.
I think things are right.
It felt significantly smoother. I don't know, guys, if you had the same experience from when I was testing it, but it felt significantly smoother from the beginning. Maybe it's the potion thing, not having to go back to town all the time. Like I wasn't really going back to town for that, but the majority of it felt just a lot smoother. I don't know if it was the couch co-op or something about it. So the plane is
especially. So I think. So there are three things that I think are the major difference. So flasks are big, right? The next one is support gems. The support gems change the power of your character significantly, and they're also like a really good moment of just like getting an upgrade to your character, and that like it feels a lot better. And then the other thing as well, actually I had something on my mind, but it's fallen out again. What was it? The other major thing is that there's a lot more side things to find that give you specific drops that make it so you don't fall into the balance hole of like having the wrong gear or that sort of stuff. So we added a lot of that stuff all through Act 1, and as I said, you may not have even found all of it because we put enough in there so that when you're just randomly exploring around, you're likely to find stuff that's going to help you a lot. But the overall balance of the game other than the flask thing, mostly didn't change very much. It was really just around like making sure that like the supports and the extra stuff defined. That's part of why I was so worried, because I really didn't want to just nerf things. I didn't want to just like say, okay, these bosses are easier now. I wanted to try and find a way without doing that to kind of improve things. So I was very happy that actually worked. Because it felt dangerous to me.
Oh, sorry, guys, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I like the idea that the changes that you had with the rare monsters in areas had like specific drops, maybe uncut skill gems or a flask, for example, that would help you handle the next coming challenge. And if you didn't kill that one, that would exist in the next zone.
Yeah.
Like, I would not have noticed that if you didn't.
So we've got some second chance drops as well. So effectively, if you didn't get something in one place, then the next area will make it drop there instead from one of the other places that will also drop something else. We've got a few of those things going on as well. So with quite a lot of effort just to make sure that like the minimum experience is lifted up without raising the top experience, if you know what I mean. Like just try to compress that band a bit, because PoE is a game with like an absurd amount of variance that you can get as far as like good players versus bad players. And so the challenge is like how to push the bad players up. Okay, I say bad players, like it is often not even the fault of the player, right? It's the fault of just like you got bad RNG, or you got like whatever, you just know some particular random thing. So I should probably not accuse people of being bad. Just for whatever reason, right? You fall into a hole. We need to make sure that doesn't happen as much.
But
this is like why I love talking to you, because you're so passionate about these things. Like I wouldn't have known about that specific detail, right, unless you told me at the event. Same thing with like I experienced desync at the event. I was like, I've never seen this in like 8 years of Path of Exile, and it was a problem that you then had told me existed up until recently in Path of Exile 1.
Yeah,
never experienced it.
Yeah, there was a lot of desync testing we had to do around minions as well. We just found so many of them, and with like a bunch of problems. We're actually on PoE 1. There's a bunch of fixes that are going to come from PoE 2 onto PoE 1 soon to address a bunch of that stuff. Kind of funny how that stuff is. Like it's honestly amazing to me how problems can go for years without anyone noticing them or realizing. It's kind of crazy.
So I have one more question around boss balancing, and then how would you feel about doing a rapid fire section from the chat? We actually give the chat here, as I suppose we're wrapping up. We're getting over an hour here. So
yeah, no problem.
Okay, so chat, go ahead and start putting your questions in there, because directly after this question, we're going to start reading some of these, and we'll rapid fire at them, and this is your opportunity to get some questions in. So around boss design, so the game seems that it's going to be on console, it's going to be couch co-op, cross progression, all that. So I'm assuming you guys are expecting a much wider demographic, and also newer players are going to be associated with this game. Like, for instance, my buddy flew from Australia, not really a PoE player, played with him, and we were going together just fine. He was able to pick up the game, no problem, didn't really need prior experience, and he was actually doing great. So, like, I was impressed how quickly you're able to pick up PoE too if you're not really familiar with PoE at all. But because of that, you guys are probably expecting more people are going to be playing together than ever. So does this affect boss design when you guys are designing implement bosses? How often are you thinking this is a boss design, with one slow mechanic for one person, as opposed to, okay, this is going to be trivialized because there's two people? Does this come up in development at all?
It certainly comes up, but I would say that the primary thing that we're thinking about when we're designing bosses is just what's going to be cool. There's usually some way to make it work, no matter what. Like there'll be some kind of workaround. But ultimately, it just comes down to what's cool. And bosses get to take a lot of iteration, like way more than you might expect, and party iteration as well. And I'm certain that there'll be more changes even to the bosses that you played, because like it really takes like just playing against it and playing against it and playing against it. And a lot of the time, you can design a boss and think that you have all the abilities that you need, and then when you actually play it, you find out you need like 3 more, just to kind of cover all the different possible axes, as far as like the most obvious one being range versus melee, but also just like like party, like people where they're standing and so on. So that boss in the video that you just saw at the beginning of this live stream, the Torgal the Defiler, that boss actually has like 4 more abilities it didn't even use in the first. Actually, no, I guess it would have used probably most of them in the video you just saw. But when we did the demo on stage for you guys, it like didn't even use a bunch of those abilities, and like a lot of these things are like needed for specific cases where like, oh, you've got a player who's going to do this, and like we need an ability to deal with that, and this kind of stuff, or you know, with different people standing around and just that sort of stuff. So like you just end up needing quite a lot of that stuff, and it's especially bad on bosses that are fixed like that because they don't have the ability to move around to respond to things. They need a like hard-coded ability for every single possible way you could be standing or place you could be or the thing that you're doing. So it ends up being like a boss like that is just like such a huge design challenge. And I mean, there's actually a boss that hasn't received as much love in this regard. That is also a fixed position boss, which is the Titan in the Titan Grotto. And that one I would say is not up to scratch right now. It needs more abilities and more stuff going on. Like it doesn't actually happen when a boss is like that and it doesn't have what it needs, it ends up just feeling dumb. Like you look at it and you're like, why is it just like attacking over here? Why is like and like that is actually really immersion breaking. So it can be one of those things that you know that's very hard to do. And honestly, the skills required to be able to do this kind of design are very, very hard to find. Like Mark, who is in charge of that stuff, is just really, really excellent at this stuff. But honestly, like it is very hard to find people who have a really good understanding of boss design. It's a very, very tough skill.
I like the boss that you showed in the introduction of the event, which apparently were lacking the uses of a lot of the abilities. The guy that's supposed to rip up his chest and spawn out little babies, but we never got to see that. But that fight felt fulfilling, you know, from what we saw, at least, even without that.
Yeah, I mean, but the reason why it does is because he was using the abilities he needed to use for where I was at the time. You know what I mean? It's like it only feels bad at the point when like he doesn't appear to be responding to you correctly, or like things aren't things aren't working out right. And so then he would use those other abilities were the situation to come up. You know, yeah, that's kind of what you end up with.
Fair enough. DM, do you have any other questions lined up? Otherwise, we can jump into some rapid fire, take some questions from chat if you're down.
I mean, I think we got pretty much all of our questions down. So much we even asked you the same one twice. So I think that I think we pretty much got through everything at this point. So I think what we do is we'll start grabbing them from rapid fire. Why don't you grab the first one, guys? You can grab them for your chat. I'll grab them for my chat, and we can get going here with the rapid fire section. Then we'll close it on out, boys. So spam your questions.
Absolutely. So a lot of people are talking about the temporary minions versus permanent minions when it comes to boss fights. And it's a shame that we would not be able to utilize the temp minions as effectively on a boss fight as a witch. So the question has a lot to do with a bunch of suggestions of how Desecrate can work. I think the better question would be, are you keen on introducing some sort of way to generate corpses, either through support gems or something? Is that something you're completely
I'm actually really not. And I think that Desecrate like hurt the sort of corpse economy of PoE1 very significantly. It really handcuffed us as far as what we could do. Like I think corpse as a resource, as a mechanic, is pretty interesting. And so you know, like Desecrate just kind of destroys that. Now that said, like as I said, for zombies, for example, there is a way to get them even when you're in boss fights. Like there are a few workarounds that were kind of interesting, and so that's kind of the way that I would approach these on a skill by skill basis. Like thinking about like, okay, is there going to be some way that we can make it so the skill can still work on a boss fight using some other mechanic? But I don't think that just in general being able to create corpses on demand is okay as far as balance goes.
A couple. This one's came up since the beginning of the podcast. People are asking about stances on macros for PoE 2.
I mean, our stance on macros is exactly the same as it is in PoE1, basically. Like, follow that guidance and, you know, you'll be fine.
Figure this much.
With the rarity, sorry?
No, go on.
With rarity and those things being scaled when it comes to party play, is there concerns that people would have group magic find for the sake of dropping the highest tier rarity uniques?
So rarity actually isn't scaled with party play. So it was in PoE1, but in PoE2 it's only the things that I said before. You get more of certain types of items to like make sense of your character. But there's no actual rarity. So yeah, it doesn't work. That will not be a problem.
Okay, then I misunderstood you. That's perfect. Thanks for elaborating that then.
No problem.
Question, it's sort of an accessibility question here. Someone's asking about reducing brightness and flashing. Is that going to be something for people with sensitive vision?
It hasn't been on our radar, but I mean, I think I'd have to see an example of like, and to understand that fully. Like, I don't think I understand enough to be able to to clearly know what to do about that.
Sure.
You mentioned Necromancer, or Witch rather, being the Sue summoner class.
Yep.
A lot of questions are about the fantasy of engaging with other types of fantasy summoner types, such as an actual Sue, Druid minion builds, for example. We've seen wolves. Is that something on the on the map right now?
Well, there will certainly be more than one summon for the Druid. You've seen wolves already. There'll be other stuff.
One of the questions here is in relation to hardcore. Is balancing done at all around hardcore, or what's your philosophy on balancing in relation to hardcore?
I would say that it mostly isn't. Like, we do bear it in mind sometimes, but I wouldn't say that our concern is hardcore. Like, hardcore is one of those things that you should do once you are like once you've gone. I wouldn't play hardcore the first time you're playing, especially not in PoE 2. But what I will say is that the overall philosophy of the boss design in PoE 2 is such that I think hardcore is eminently possible once you learn the boss abilities. There's actually even a problem that we've had in the studio of like, you get too good at the boss fights and you start to believe that they're easy when they're actually not. But it's just because you've learned the mechanics to the point where it's now feels easy to you, and it actually can be hard to tell the difference between just learning it and like, people will literally say, "Oh, you nerfed the life on this monster," and it's like, well, we actually didn't. You just got better at it. And I even had this mistake this morning where I was complaining to Mark that I thought the early game had gotten easier in the last version, and he says, "Well, we've changed nothing, so it's probably just you're good. You got good."
I felt that way about the worms, so I know what you're talking about here. I'm gonna slip in. I'm gonna slip in one more quick one here before I send it to GHAZZY again. So, is there any plans to add animations for character rotations, like instead of just having them sort of spin when you're rotating your character, or is this an issue with?
So we fiddled a bit around with this, and right now we're in a situation where we are effectively maximizing the snappiness of it, and in exchange for that, it means you can make your character look dumb by like doing things where you spin the thing around or like move the mouse real quickly and stuff like that. But in practice, like, even though that is possible, like, it feels way better with the things tuned the way they are. So I sort of prefer it. There was a couple of other things we've tried. So there is some stuff that's gone on with rotation. Actually, you can see it if you use click to move more. So in click to move, the character doesn't rotate as fast. It doesn't need to, because you don't have the same situation with regard to the way that it controls. So like, your character can like rotate more slowly as it goes from place to place. So if you actually were to look at click to move, you'd see that there is actually some interesting rotation stuff going on. But yeah, like, overall, we prioritize the gameplay and snappiness over the kind of over the like the possibility of making your character look bad. So that's kind of why it is the way it is.
Fair enough. I got a lot of questions lined up. Some of them are in the same ballpark. It's about early access. I guess the question, I can try to summarize all of these into, when do you think the game is ready for early access? And when I say that, I'm talking about, is all the classes going to be available? Is that when we're going to play it, or do we need all the ascendancies?
So I don't think we have to have absolutely everything in early access, but we do have to have enough of the game, and by enough I mean like most of the game, ready. Because if we don't, then we're not really going to get the feedback that we need to get. So, like, I think that the minimum is like, you need you need almost all of the acts. Like, I don't think we can really live without that. I think you need most of the character classes, so that you've got sort of something for all the different archetypes, at least working, even if you don't have every single character class. I don't think you necessarily need every ascendancy, but you certainly need to have every class in the game have at least one ascendancy. Otherwise, you don't have the power that you would have gotten from it. So we'll try to get as many as we can in there. But yeah, what you need basically is enough so that you can actually play the game from beginning to end to the greatest extent possible. The economy is correct. The balance is overall mostly correct, and so on. If you don't have that, I don't think you can really do the testing you need to do. So yeah, you'll get it at that point. I don't think that point is that far off. I think we're getting much closer. We've got, obviously, internally when we believe it's going to be. We could still be incorrect. We don't want to say a specific date just in case we're wrong, but we're pretty certain. We're almost 100% certain. I mean, more than almost. We're very certain it's going to be this year. We will announce a proper date later on. But basically, yeah, we need to make sure that there's enough of the game. I don't think it's acceptable to just be like, oh, here's Act 1 and 2, go play that. Like, that isn't enough. You're not really, that's more of a demo than it is like an actual early access feedback period. So yeah, that's why we need to do that.
I'll ask you one more, and then I suppose, guys, you can do one more, and we'll wrap it up and get you out of here. So one of the questions I saw in chat was in relation to rare mobs. Like, they're pretty scary early on in the game when you see rare mobs. Are they expected to effectively, by the end of the game, have transferred into like the trash mob level, or are they going to keep up that level of threat continually?
I think that they need to keep up some level of threat. What we don't want to end up with is a situation where it feels like rares are better than the bosses, which can be an issue sometimes in PoE 1. So we need to make sure that's not the case. One thing I will say is that I think there's a lot more that we should be doing with rares. I have found that I want to play around a bit, and we haven't done this yet, but I want to play around a bit with mods and what will combine in certain ways and what don't, and like what mods can appear on certain on monsters and so on. I think that we could be better here to make the average rare fight more enjoyable. Yeah, I think we can do better here, and we'll still have more stuff for that to come. But basically they should be strong. They should feel like a thing.
Sees.
Certainly they shouldn't feel like they're beating the bosses of the area.
All right, GHAZZY, why don't you hit him with the last one of the day?
So it's a classic. People want to know what happens to Cyclone. Can you share anything about that?
Sorry, what happened to what? Sorry,
Cyclone.
Oh, Cyclone. Well, I mean, we are going to have it, but we haven't shown the class yet that we'll have it yet. So yeah, there's you will see, I suppose.
See.
It might be unsatisfying, but generally speaking, if it's like that sort of stuff, it's going to be a little bit. But yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, answering all of the questions, the million different Minion ones. It was a pleasure to meet you in person, and thanks for inviting us for the play test. That was fun as well, and console couch co-op is going to be great.
Yeah, really, really fun podcast, and it's great to be here. So thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Thanks again.
GHAZZY, any last words before we head on out?
I guess not. So just play early access when we get there, and then thanks.
Early access later this year. All right, cheers. Bye. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
All right, boys. Let's recall back GHAZZY to chat about that. Pretty much ends the podcast. Oh my God, the zoom in. A little much. Well, we let GHAZZY run free with his minion questions. GHAZZY had some good ones, asking about the minions there. Thanks to Jonathan for giving us our time. That one fell harder than the other one. Go straight into the reveal, into the questions like and I didn't get a chance to play the witch at the test. I played monk. I wanted to ask monk Andy stuff, but that was the witch chat, boys. The witch looks awesome. I'm sure everyone is fist pumping who is a Minion Andy player, because it looks pretty good. So I can tell you monk was fun though. That was the one I played. I'm gonna call GHAZZY back and watch him freak out over the minions. Let's give him a ring here.